They say the deep woods swallow runaways whole, leaving nothing behind but rumors and bones. But when Amanda collapsed beneath the ancient pines, she didn't know the shadows were alive. She slept completely alone, utterly defenseless, blissfully unaware that the most dangerous predator in North America watched her every breath. The October wind, cutting through the Mount Hood National Forest, carried the bitter scent of impending snow and decaying pine. For Amanda Bennett, it felt like a frozen blade against her tear-stained cheeks. She was 26, a former paralegal from Seattle, whose life had been violently derailed by a man named Derek Sullivan. Derek wasn't just a toxic ex-boyfriend. He was a violent operative tied to a subterranean human trafficking ring operating out of the Pacific Northwest. Amanda had seen ledges she shouldn't have seen. She had run. Her 2012 Subaru Outback had hissed its last dying breath of coolant 3 miles down an unmarked logging road just off Route 26. With the sun sinking fast and her cell phone displaying a mocking "no service," Amanda had done the only thing she could. She grabbed her cheap 2-person canvas tent, a flashlight and a sleeping bag, and hiked into the dense, suffocating tree line to hide. She pitched the tent with shaking hands, her knuckles raw and bleeding from the cold. Every snap of a twig made her flinch, her mind conjuring images of Derek's black SUV crawling up the gravel road. Exhaustion, however, is a heavier burden than fear. By the time the moon crested the jagged peaks of the Cascade Mountains, casting long, skeletal shadows across the forest floor, Amanda had crawled into her sleeping bag. She curled into a tight ball, shivering violently, and allowed the exhaustion to drag her into a fitful, dark sleep. She was alone. At least, that was what her rational mind told her. Less than 50 yards away, crouched atop a granite outcropping that overlooked the makeshift campsite, was a beast born of nightmare and myth. Kalen Cross did not tolerate trespassers in the Obsidian Pack's ancestral territory. As the Alpha King of the Western Territories, a man who ruled a hidden empire of over 3,000 wolves across Oregon and Washington, Kalen was a ghost to the human world. To his own kind, he was a ruthless, battle-scarred warlord who had spent the last decade cleansing his lands of feral rogues. He was in his wolf form, a massive, terrifying creature with pitch-black fur that seemed to absorb the moonlight, standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder. He had tracked the scent of burnt antifreeze and human panic for 3 miles, ready to tear the throat out of whichever hunter or hiker had dared to cross the boundary line. But when he reached the clearing and looked down at the flimsy nylon tent, the snarl died in his throat. The wind shifted, blowing from the valley below, and Kalen's golden eyes widened. The scent hit him with the force of a physical blow. It was an intoxicating, dizzying blend of crushed lavender, rain-soaked earth, and something incredibly sweet. It was a scent that bypassed his logical brain and clawed directly at his soul. Mate. The word echoed in his mind, primitive and possessive. His massive chest heaved. He had lived 32 human years, resigning himself to the likelihood that a king as blood-soaked as he was would never find his destined equal. Yet here she was, trembling in a cheap sleeping bag, a fragile human trespassing in the deadliest forest on the continent. But as Kalen crept closer, his massive paws making absolutely no sound against the dead leaves, his highly attuned senses picked up something else beneath the lavender. A metallic tang. Not just fear. Bloodline. She smelled entirely human, but buried deep within her. DNA was a dormant, ancient trace of the Silver Pines pack, a bloodline thought to have been eradicated 50 years ago. She didn't know what she was. Kalen settled into the thick ferns just 10 feet from her tent. He could hear her heartbeat. It was erratic, fluttering like a trapped bird's. He could hear her ragged breathing, the way her teeth chattered in the 30-degree air. His instinct screamed at him to tear the canvas open, to drag her into his arms, to claim her and carry her deep into his mountain estate where nothing could ever hurt her. But he forced his wolf back. She was terrified. If a 300-pound dire wolf ripped into her tent in the dead of night, her heart might give out. Suddenly, Kaelin's ears swiveled back. The hackles on his spine stood on end. 2 miles to the east, the scent of rotting meat and sulphur tainted the crisp mountain air. Rogues, 3 of them. Feral, packless wolves, driven mad by isolation and hunger. And they were sprinting straight toward the clearing, drawn by the scent of a vulnerable human. Kaelin's lips peeled back in a silent, savage snarl. He didn't howl. He didn't alert his border patrols. This was his mate. No one else would spill blood for her tonight, but him. He melted into the darkness, intercepting the rogues a 1/4 mile from Amanda's tent. The violence was absolute and utterly silent. Kaelin moved like a shadow of death. He snapped the neck of the first rogue before the creature even realized it was being hunted. The second tried to yelp, but Kaelin's jaws crushed its windpipe in a spray of hot crimson. The third, realizing it had walked into the jaws of the Alpha King, turned to flee. Kaelin ran it down, ending its miserable life with a brutal swipe of his massive claws. Covered in the blood of his enemies, Kaelin dragged the carcasses miles away, burying them deep in a ravine so the scent of death wouldn't wake her. By 2 a.m., he was back. The temperature had dropped well below freezing. Amanda was whimpering in her sleep, her body struggling to maintain its core temperature. Kaelin couldn't stand it anymore. Slowly, deliberately, the massive black wolf stepped out of the shadows and approached the tent. He circled it once, then laid his enormous, heavily muscled body directly against the thin nylon side where Amanda's back was pressed. He acted as a living, breathing furnace, radiating an immense amount of body heat through the fabric. Inside the tent, Amanda stopped shivering. In her sleep, sensing the profound, sudden warmth, she unconsciously rolled over and pressed herself against the side of the tent, her face inches from where Kaelin's massive head rested on the outside. He stayed there until the sky turned bruised purple with the dawn, watching over her, listening to her breathe, silently swearing an oath to the moon that whoever she was running from was already a dead man. Amanda woke to the sound of a blue jay calling from the canopy above. For a few seconds, she lay perfectly still, disoriented. She braced herself for the bone-deep ache of freezing temperatures, but surprisingly, she was entirely warm. In fact, she felt wrapped in a heavy, comforting heat, as if she had slept beside a roaring fireplace. The memories of the previous day crashed down on her. Derek's terrifying phone call, the frantic packing, the dead car, the pitch-black forest. Amanda unzipped her sleeping bag and crawled to the front flap of the tent. She slowly unzipped the mesh, peeking out into the misty morning light. The forest was stunningly beautiful, silent and ethereal. But as she crawled out to stand and stretch her aching muscles, she froze. Directly beside her tent, the tall, dew-soaked grass was completely flattened, forming a massive oval indentation. Amanda stared at it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was no tracker, but she knew the woods. Whatever had slept against her tent was enormous, bigger than a mountain lion, bigger than an elk. Then she saw the footprints in the mud near a rusted coffee can she had left out. Paw prints. They were the size of dinner plates, pressed deep into the earth. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead. A bear? No, bears didn't have prints like that. A wolf? There hadn't been wolves in this part of Oregon in decades, and certainly none this size. She had slept through the night, entirely vulnerable, while a monster had laid right against her. Panic, sharp and blinding, urged her to move. She didn't bother packing the tent. She grabbed her backpack, shoved her wallet and the single canister of pepper spray she owned into her jacket pocket, and began practically jogging down the logging road toward the highway. She had to get to town. She had to find a mechanic, or a bus, or a police station. She walked for 30 minutes, jumping at every snap of a branch. The dense fog made the trees look like grasping hands. "You're a long way from the trail, sweetheart," Amanda screamed, spinning around, her hand flying to the pepper spray in her pocket. Stepping out from a narrow game trail onto the logging road was a man. He was shockingly tall, well over 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to block out the morning sun. He wore faded denim jeans, heavy leather work boots, and a dark green flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows, exposing heavily corded forearms covered in faint, pale scars. His hair was jet black, falling slightly into eyes that were an intense, mesmerizing shade of amber. He held a vintage hunting rifle casually over one shoulder, but he didn't point it at her. "Easy," he said, his voice a deep, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate in Amanda's chest. He held up his free hand in a placating gesture. "I didn't mean to scare you. I'm Kalen. I own the property you're walking on." Amanda took a step back, her thumb on the safety of the pepper spray. I'm sorry. My car broke down. I didn't see no trespassing signs." Kalen's golden eyes flicked over her, taking in her pale skin, the dark circles under her eyes, and the sheer terror radiating off her in waves. His inner wolf was clawing at the walls of his mind, demanding he close the distance, but he locked it down. "It's a private trust," Kalen said smoothly, his eyes locking onto hers. "It's dangerous out here alone. Temperatures dropped to 28 degrees last night. You're lucky you didn't freeze." "You're lucky I was there," Kalen thought, inhaling the subtle scent of lavender that still clung to her. In the daylight, she was even more breathtaking. Her auburn hair was a tangled mess, her hazel eyes wide and defensive. "I'm fine," Amanda lied, her voice shaking slightly. "If you could just point me toward the nearest gas station." "It's 12 miles to government camp," Kalen replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My truck is parked a quarter mile up the ridge. I'll give you a ride. No strings attached. I'm just making sure a trespasser doesn't die of hypothermia on my land. Makes for terrible paperwork." Amanda hesitated. Every survival instinct she had honed over the last year with Derek told her not to trust strange men in isolated locations. But there was something about Kalen, despite his intimidating size and the intense, almost predatory way he looked at her. She didn't feel the oily, crawling sensation of danger she normally felt around men like Derek. She felt an inexplicable, gravitational pull toward him, a bizarre sense of safety. "Okay," Amanda whispered, loosening her grip on the pepper spray. "Thank you. I'm Amanda." "Amanda," Kalen repeated. The way her name rolled off his tongue sent a sudden shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. They walked in silence for 10 minutes. Kalen stayed a respectful few paces ahead, effortlessly navigating the steep terrain. Amanda watched the fluid, powerful way he moved. There was a grace to him that seemed almost animalistic. They reached a wide clearing where a heavy-duty, lifted black Ford F250 sat parked on the dirt. Relief washed over Amanda. She wasn't going to die out here. But as they approached the truck, the crunch of heavy gravel echoed from the main road ahead. 2 vehicles, a grey pickup truck and a sleek, out-of-place black Chevy Tahoe, turned the corner and blocked the exit of the clearing. Amanda's blood ran cold, the air ripped from her lungs. The doors of the Tahoe opened. 3 men stepped out. Two were large, broad-shouldered enforcers wearing tactical jackets. But it was the third man, stepping out of the driver's side, that made Amanda's knees buckle. Derek Sullivan. He wore a tailored charcoal coat, looking wildly out of place in the Oregon mud, his blonde hair slicked back. He offered Amanda a chilling, familiar smile that didn't reach his dead blue eyes. "Hello, Amanda," Derek called out, leaning against the door of his SUV. "You have no idea how much money I had to spend to track the GPS on your phone before you turned it off. Did you really think a dead radiator was going to hide you from me?" Amanda couldn't speak. She took a terrified step backward, blindly bumping into Kalen's solid chest. Kalen didn't move. He stood like a brick wall behind her. "And who is the lumberjack?" Derek sneered, pulling a 9mm Glock from his shoulder holster and letting it hang casually by his side. The two enforcers beside him also rested their hands on their weapons. "Listen to me, buddy. I don't know who you are, but the girl belongs to me. She stole something from my employer. Walk away right now, and you get to live." Kalen didn't reach for his rifle. He slowly lowered it, leaning it against the tire of his Ford. Amanda grabbed Kalen's forearm, her fingers digging into his flannel. "Please," she choked out, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "Run! They'll kill you! They're cartel! Just run! I'll distract them." Kalen looked down at the small, trembling hand clutching his arm. A low, terrifying sound began to vibrate in his chest, a sound that didn't belong to a human. It was a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. He gently detached Amanda's hand from his arm and stepped in front of her, placing his massive body entirely between her and the guns. When Kalen looked up at Derek, the illusion of the polite landowner was gone. His eyes, normally a dark amber, were now glowing with a piercing, unnatural gold light. The temperature in the clearing seemed to plummet further. "You're standing on my land," Kalen said, his voice dropping into a dark, echoing register that made the two enforcers visibly flinch. "And you are threatening my mate." Derek frowned, raising the pistol. "Your what?" "Listen, freak, I don't care about your land." "You misunderstand," Kalen interrupted, taking a slow, heavy step forward. His bones cracked loudly in the silence of the forest. The flesh on his hands began to darken, his fingernails elongating into thick, black talons. "I wasn't asking you to leave." Kalen gave Amanda a brief glance over his shoulder, his golden eyes filled with a terrifying, protective fury. "Close your eyes, Amanda," the Alpha King commanded. "This is going to be messy." Amanda didn't close her eyes. She couldn't. She was paralyzed, trapped in a waking nightmare as the laws of physics and biology shattered before her. Kalen's transformation was not some graceful, cinematic illusion. It was a violent, explosive restructuring of bone and muscle, his broad shoulders violently contorted, tearing the thick flannel of his shirt to shreds. A heavy, sickening crack echoed through the clearing as his spine elongated, and a thick coat of midnight black fur erupted from his skin. In less than 3 seconds, the tall, handsome landowner was gone. In his place stood the monstrous, 4-foot-tall dire wolf that had left the dinner plate-sized prince outside her tent. Derek's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "Shoot it!" he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. The two enforcers raised their tactical rifles, opening fire. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire shattered the morning silence, tearing through the pine branches and kicking up geysers of mud. But Kalen was no longer a stationary target. He moved with a speed that defied his massive bulk, a blur of shadow and lethal intent. He didn't just dodge the bullets, he absorbed the glancing blows with thick muscle and dense fur, feeling nothing but a stinging heat. In a single terrifying bound, the Alpha King cleared the 20 feet between him and the first enforcer. The man didn't even have time to scream. Kaelin's massive jaws clamped over the tactical vest, crushing Kevlar, ribs, and the rifle itself in one devastating bite. He tossed the 200-pound man aside like a rag doll. The second enforcer dropped his weapon and turned to run back toward the Tahoe, but Kaelin's heavy paw swiped out, 3-inch claws tearing through the man's jacket and throwing him violently into the broad trunk of a Douglas fir. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he landed. Silence crashed back over the clearing, save for the ringing in Amanda's ears and the heavy, wet panting of the enormous black wolf. Derek Sullivan was on his knees in the mud. He had dropped his 9mm Glock. He was staring up at the beast, shaking so violently he could barely keep himself upright. Kaelin stalked forward, the deep, guttural rumble vibrating in his chest once more. He lowered his massive, blood-stained muzzle until he was inches from Derek's face. The hot breath ruffled Derek's slicked back hair. "Wait, please," Derek babbled. Tears streaming down his face, his hands raised in surrender. "I didn't know. Alexander didn't tell us this was your territory." At the name Alexander, the wolf paused. Kaelin's golden eyes narrowed. "The ledgers," Derek choked out, desperate to buy his life. "The trafficking ring, it's a front. Alexander Sterling isn't looking for the books she stole. He's looking for her. She's a silver pine. Alexander said she was the last one. He needs her blood to synthesize the silver cure, please. I swear to God." Amanda stood by the Ford truck, her mind spinning wildly. Silver Pine? Alexander Sterling? Alexander was the CEO of the logistics company Derek worked for, the very company she had investigated. The Black Wolf stared at Derek for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a swift, brutal movement, Kaelin struck. He didn't kill Derek. He simply slammed his heavy skull into the man's chest, cracking 3 ribs and sending Derek sprawling into the mud, completely incapacitated. Kaelin turned back toward Amanda. He was covered in mud and blood, his golden eyes burning with an intense, possessive light. He took a step toward her. Amanda's back hit the cold metal of the F-250. The terror she had felt towards Derek was entirely eclipsed by the primal, suffocating presence of the apex predator approaching her. This was the monster from the night before. This was the furnace that had kept her warm. "Mater," a deep, resonating voice echoed directly into her mind. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it thrummed in her skull, rich and heavy. Amanda gasped, clutching her head. The shock, the freezing temperatures, and the sheer impossibility of what she had just witnessed finally overwhelmed her exhausted nervous system. The misty forest spun into a blur of green and grey, and Amanda collapsed, plummeting into darkness. When she finally opened her eyes, the scent of damp pine and metallic blood was gone. Instead, she smelled cedarwood, wood smoke, and a hint of expensive leather. She was lying in a massive, 4-poster bed covered in heavy, heated-down comforters. The room around her was expansive and rustic, with vaulted timber ceilings, a roaring stone fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a breathtaking, mist-shrouded valley. It looked like a billionaire's ski lodge. "You're awake." Amanda bolted upright, pulling the heavy duvet to her chin. Sitting in a leather armchair near the fire was Kaelin. He was back in his human form, wearing clean, dark jeans and a black Henley shirt that stretched tight across his broad chest. The only evidence of the morning's violence was a small, fading scratch on his cheek, which seemed to be healing right before her eyes. "Where am I?" Amanda croaked, her throat dry. "You're at the Obsidian Pack Estate," Kaelin said smoothly, standing and walking over to pour a glass of water from a crystal pitcher on the bedside table. He handed it to her. His fingers brushed hers, and a jolt of electricity shot up Amanda's arm. She gasped, nearly dropping the glass. Kaylin's eyes flashed gold for a fraction of a second. "You're perfectly safe here, Amanda. No human law enforcement or cartel can breach this valley." She drank the water greedily, trying to anchor herself to reality. You're a werewolf, like the movies." "The movies are terribly inaccurate, but yes," Kaylin said, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "My name is Kaylin Cross. I am the alpha of this territory, and you, Amanda Bennett, are a very long way from Seattle." "Derek," she whispered, the panic rising again. "What did you do to them?" "They are currently being held in a subterranean cell on the edge of the property, courtesy of my beta Wyatt. They will answer a few more questions, and then they will never threaten you again." Kaylin leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "But we have a larger problem. Derek mentioned Alexander Sterling." Amanda nodded slowly. "Alexander owns Pacific Logistics. I was a paralegal for their corporate counsel. I found offshore accounts, ledgers. They were trafficking people. I downloaded the files and ran." "Alexander Sterling isn't a logistics CEO," Kaylin corrected, his voice hardening. "He is the head of the Sterling Syndicate, an ancient order of hunters and geneticists who have spent centuries trying to eradicate my kind. And they weren't trafficking humans, Amanda. They were trafficking rogue wolves for experimentation." Amanda stared at him, her reality fracturing further. "But Derek said Alexander wanted me. He called me a silver pine. What does that mean?" Kaylin sighed, a heavy, sorrowful sound. 50 years ago, the Silver Pines were the royal pack of the coastal territories. They possessed a unique genetic trait. Their blood carried an absolute immunity to silver, our only true weakness. The Sterling Syndicate ambushed their stronghold in 1974. They slaughtered the entire bloodline to harvest their genetics. Or so we thought. Kaylin reached out, his large, warm hand gently cupping Amanda's cheek. The touch was so tender it brought tears to her eyes. "Your parents, Amanda. Were you adopted?" Amanda swallowed hard, nodding. "Yes. Closed adoption. I never knew them." "You are the last living descendant of the Silver Pine Alpha," Kaylin murmured, his thumb brushing a tear from her skin. "You are a wolf, Amanda. The gene has just been dormant, because you've lived entirely in the human world." Alexander realized who you were. The ledgers were just his excuse to hunt you down without alerting the supernatural community. Amanda shook her head violently, pulling away. No, I'm just a paralegal. I'm a human. I don't turn into a giant dog." "Wolf," Kaylin corrected gently, an amused smile playing on his lips. "And you will. Because last night, when I found you freezing in my woods, I didn't just find a trespasser. I found my mate." For the next 2 days, Amanda moved through the Obsidian estate as if caught in a dream. The hidden compound stretched deep into the Cascades, home to hundreds of wolves who bowed their heads respectfully whenever she passed. Wyatt, a towering enforcer with a scarred face, rarely left her side, while Sarah, the pack's healer, calmly explained the strange changes unfolding within her body. The bond with Kaylin was awakening Amanda's dormant wolf. Fever burned constantly beneath her skin. Her senses sharpened painfully. She could hear the fluttering heartbeat of birds on the roof and detect faint mineral traces in the water she drank. Yet the most overwhelming change was the pull toward Kaylin. Whenever he entered a room, fear from her former life seemed to dissolve, replaced by a deep, instinctive need to be near him. Though he ruled his pack like a war-hardened king, he treated her with quiet patience, sleeping beside the fire while she rested in his bed. On the 3rd night, the calm shattered. Amanda was reading old Silverpine journals in the estate library when the perimeter alarm screamed to life. The sound stabbed painfully into her heightened hearing. Moments later, Kaelin burst through the doors, dressed in tactical gear, Wyatt close behind. "Sterling's mercenaries," Kaelin said grimly. They traced Derek's GPS signal. He ordered Wyatt to take Amanda to the underground vault, but she refused. Something fierce and unfamiliar had awakened inside her. Before she could argue further, Wyatt guided her below, while Kaelin rushed outside, shifting mid-stride into his massive black wolf as battle erupted. Gunfire and wolf howls thundered above. Suddenly, Amanda collapsed, a searing pain exploding through her spine. Through the bond, she felt Kaelin's injury, silver poisoning tearing through his body. The agony broke something inside her. Her scream transformed into a haunting howl as her body changed. When the transformation ended, a magnificent silver-white wolf stood where Amanda had fallen. The last Silverpine had awakened, and she was coming for her mate. Amanda fled into the forest, seeking escape from a human nightmare, only to discover a supernatural destiny she never knew she possessed. She arrived as a terrified, hunted paralegal, but remained as the fiercely protective Lunar Queen of the Obsidian Pack. Beside Kaelin, the Alpha King who guarded her darkest night, Amanda finally found a terrifying, beautiful world where she would never have to sleep alone again.